I'd like to call the April 9th, 2015 meeting of the City Council to order. Jay, would you call the roll, please?
Ms. Newton. Here. Mr. Pons.
Here.
Mayor Holman.
Here.
Vice Mayor Fryman.
Here.
Mr. Foster.
Here.
First order of business today, council minutes from the meetings of March 9th and March 12th, the March 11th joint school board meeting and budget work session of March 23rd. Are there any additions or corrections?
Mr. Mayor, I'll move that City Council approve the minutes from the March 9th and March 12th, 2015 meetings, the March 11th, 2015 joint school board meeting, and the March 23rd budget work session.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Would you call the roll, please, Jerry?
Ms. Newton.
Aye.
Mr. Pons.
Aye.
Mayor Holman.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Fryman.
Aye.
Mr. Foster.
Aye.
Our next order of business is matters of special privilege, and today we have an Excellence in Service to Williamsburg Award. This is a particularly important event that we go through periodically because it recognizes one of our employees. And what's important about this is that recognition comes from their peers, and they're nominated by peers. And this is a chance for us to say thank you to one of our own for a wonderful job they do. And this is for Dana Jones. Dana, if you would meet me at the podium. Dana, I have a proclamation that I'm going to read, and then we'll let you say a few words if you would like, and then we have a plaque. Let me read this. The City of Williamsburg takes pleasure in recognizing Dana Jones for excellence in service to Williamsburg. For the past 12 years, Dana Jones has served the citizens of Williamsburg with efficacy and grace. She excelled in her initial role transacting city businesses at the public counter of the finance office. Her dependability, eye for detail, and strong interpersonal skills led to her promotion as the city's payroll and accounts payable specialist. In that capacity, Dana has mastered payroll and benefit accounting for 240 employees. This February, when a holiday and snowstorm closed the city offices at the time of payroll deadlines, she worked both days all alone in the municipal building. Co-workers love Dana. Her responsibilities also include timely and accurate processing of the city's vendor payments, producing fully digitized and accessible financial records. Dana also chairs the Walking Club, which is part of the city's employee health and wellness initiative. Dana was instrumental in establishing the city's partnership with the American Heart Association's Start Walking Now, and an online program to track steps and encourage all city employees toward better health. Dana Jones is a compassionate, positive, and exemplary member of the city team, and she is hereby recognized for her commitment to excellence in keeping with the best tradition of public service in the city of Williamsburg. This is dated today, April 9th, and signed by me as mayor and Jack Tuttle as city manager. Dana, congratulations.
Thank you. I am both humbled and overjoyed to receive the Excellent Service Award. I would like to thank each and every person who had anything to do with my being before you today. I would like to thank the Finance Department for the opportunity of being of service to both the city's taxpayers and to the city's employees for the past 12 years. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Our next agenda item is the budget presentation from the Williamsburg James City County Schools. City Council heard a detailed presentation of this at our joint meeting with the school board and the James City County supervisors. So this is going to be a follow-up presentation on that. And to start, I'd like to introduce Elise Emanuel, one of the city's two representatives to the school boards, and I think you'll make other introductions.
I will.
Elise.
I'm so pleased to be here, Mayor Holman, Vice Chair Riley, members of council. I'm here today to simply introduce you to our budget of needs. It is a budget that we have scrutinized and think it meets our needs as they are, and we hope that you will consider fully funding our budget. I want to introduce Dr. Olin Herron, our Deputy Superintendent. As you know, this is spring break for most of the schools, so Dr. Herron has agreed to be here in Dr. Constantino's stead, and then she will introduce Christine, our new CFO.
Thank you, Elise. Owen, welcome.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, Mayor Holman, members of City Council. Thank you for the opportunity to present the school board's adopted budget for your consideration this afternoon. Dr. Constantino has already presented some information pertaining to the budget at the joint meeting on March 11th of this year. This included information about projected enrollment, changing demographics, staffing to meet those needs, and comparisons with peer divisions. This afternoon, Ms. Berta, our Chief Financial Officer, will provide brief highlights of the proposed budget, and following her brief presentation, we will respond to any additional questions you may have. Thank you very much. Ms. Berta.
Welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mayor Holloman, members of City Council. It's an honor to be here today to present the highlights of the school division's approved budget. Very little has changed since the March 11th meeting. However, there were slight modifications made as a result of final action from the General Assembly, and we've reflected those in this budget. Just a brief highlight again of our enrollment trends. You can see since 2005, we've been on a steady climb in enrollment. And based on Future Things report, which is a third-party vendor that we utilize to analyze and vet our enrollment, you can see in 2016's budget, we are projecting a 200-student increase. So that trend does continue. Our enrollment projections are key because that's what we base our revenue projections and all of our staffing levels that are needed for the division off of. Just a look at what we see for the next 5 years. Again, this comes from Future Think. The blue bars are our September 2014 actual enrollment based on our current students. In 2020, our projected enrollment is the green bar. So you can see we're still showing a trend upward, which is positive for the school division because we continue to grow. Again, our student enrollment is projected to increase by 200 students. In that, we also have an increase for FTEs of 20 staffing positions, partially due to the enrollment increase, as well as restoration of positions, and additionally to highlight those areas that we're seeing the increased enrollment with special education and English language learners, which are becoming a growing population in our division. The overall budget requested is an increase of $2.9 million or 2.4%. And our per pupil cost is expected to go up by $70. A highlight of our revenue, we are asking the localities, Williamsburg and James City County, for a $1.7 million increase, or 2.2%. The sales tax appropriation from the state, which we count as local revenue in Williamsburg and James City County, is increasing by 5.2%, or just over $600,000. Our state revenues are also increasing by 1.9%, or $584,000. Other areas that we collect revenue for are going up by roughly 5%, or $33,000. Just to look at the graphic of where our funding comes from, we are very reliant on the city of Williamsburg as well as James City County to fund the school division to meet the needs, to have an excellent education system. The state revenue makes up about 26%. Just to highlight that state revenue, when we look back to the recession in fiscal year 2009 as benchmarking, that state revenue is still about $1 million below where we were in 2009. So just to highlight several of the decreases that we found efficiencies within the budget. We've taken a look at attrition and estimated what our savings will be as well as efficiencies, and we've come up with about $1.2 million. We have analyzed the electricity and fuel budgets for the last 5 years and see that we can reduce those by $250,000. The General Assembly action reduced the VRS rate from 14.5% to 14.06%. This is a slight change from the March 11th presentation. So we're achieving a decrease of $285,000. And we've made some modifications to our health insurance plans to achieve a savings of $600,000 estimated. Now, I won't go through all of these in detail, but these are several of the areas that we are including in the increases for our budget. We are looking at a step increase for most teachers and a 2.5% increase for other support and administrative staff. Health insurance rate increase after we do the adjustments to achieve some savings is 13% or $1.3 million. We have moved the technology refresh from our CIP into our operating budget, as well as the restoration of our tuition assistance program so we can target those specific areas of need in the division to get teachers that are qualified. We've also added the Wilson Reading Program, which works towards our special education students to bring them up to speed, and increased our operating allocation from enrollment for our school division, for our schools. Again, the staffing needs. Most of these are driven by the needs that we've already gone over, the increase in enrollment, the areas that we've identified as increasing needs in the division. 2 FTEs to support our special ed Wilson Reading Training Program so that we can get that off of the ground and build that program internally. We are adding a special education preschool teacher because of that population and requirements under the federal law. Restoration of a transportation specialist or a dispatcher in our transportation department, and 4 additional custodians to meet facility needs. To show you a little bit about our budget, our focus, you can see, is on instruction, where it should be. That's the most important part of our budget and the reason why we are here. So we've spent 73.2% of our budget on instruction. Then we look at where we spend the majority of our money. The majority of our money is spent on people. Roughly 87% of our budget is spent on staff, between wages and fringe benefits. Some highlights for you for the capital improvement plan. This does continue our standard refurbishment cycle. It does include school buses in the school division's approved CIP, and includes the 4th middle school. Just to highlight a few of the projects that are in desperate need of being done in the fiscal year 16 budget based on information we've received from third-party contractors and architects. The refurbishment at Clara Bird Baker can't be delayed any longer, so that's a necessity, as well as the James River roof replacement. We do have school bus replacements in this, and that's our smoothing plan where we've outlined a 9 bus replacement over the course of time. Other miscellaneous projects are smaller projects that include freezer replacements, small partial roof replacements at different schools, as well as the 4th middle school. And that is the highlights that I have for you today. Any questions?
Christina, thank you very much. I'll turn to council for any questions, comments. And again, we've seen this in even more detail at the March joint meeting. Any questions?
Sure, if you don't mind. Ms. Berger, you talked about the VRS employer rate decrease from 14.5 to 14.06 being the result of General Assembly action. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. In the General Assembly session, they voted to decrease the VRS rate that an employer would pay. The governor transferred money from the general fund to fund that at the state level, so he dumped a pot of money to cover that teacher expense. That is a 1-year thing. I don't expect that to stay. I think when they do the re-benchmarking next year, we will see that rate increase back to the rates that they had highlighted for the 5 biennium cycle plan. So I think this is just a temporary assistance that they've provided to school divisions, but I don't expect it to stick.
And you may not know the answer to this, so I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but do you have any idea why the decision was made to allocate money that way as opposed to just distributing money to the schools and allowing them to incorporate it in their regular budgeting process?
I do not know. I do not know. It was actually one of the items when it was originally presented that I did not think would make it through, but it did. And I would certainly ask your state legislators that question.
Well, it's certainly better than the practice that was undertaken several years ago, where the contribution was simply reduced with no plan for how to make up for that, which now I think we're feeling some of the consequences of. But thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Scott? Doug?
Similarly, the $600,000 in savings in the healthcare, what was it that you were able to figure out there? Was it a different plan, a different?
We participate in the local choice, so there are defined plans that we can choose from. We have lowered the plan that we've chosen, which has increased the deductible that will go to the employee. So this is a small step that we took because we had a short window of time to be able to look at health insurance changes. You've got to have enough time to educate your staff on big changes that affect them long-term. So I will say this is a small step in a long-term solution is what we're hoping for, so.
Well, it certainly, that 600,000 is a big step, so I think
Yeah.
that's a good savings, and I appreciate you guys, looking at that.
Thank you.
Judy?
I don't want to make questions, I just wanted to say thank you. This is very professional, very well done, and I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Christina? Owen, thank you very much for being here. We really do appreciate it.
Thank you.
Next agenda item, public hearings, and we have 3 today. The first is the public hearing on the budget. Budget adoption is scheduled for the May 14th budget. Jack?
Well, just to kick it off, 2 formal notices were given. One for the adoption of the overall budget, the general fund, the utility fund, capital improvements fund, public assistance, quarter path CDA, along with the tax levy. And then another notice was published specifically for the water rate increase that is recommended in the budget. So with that, of course, we had a full presentation on Monday of the budget proposal by Mrs. Miller, and we are ready now for the public hearing.
Any questions before I open the public hearing? If not, I'll open the public hearing. I do have one speaker's card for this, and that's Mr. John Whitley. John, welcome.
Thank you, Mayor Hallman, members of the City Council. I come not with specificity related to items within the budget, but to speak rather parochially relative to Governor Berkeley Road and how the budget might be attending to the issue of installation of speed humps and addressing our needs there, knowing that it will, I'm sure. But also to bring you good news that the population on Governor Berkeley Road has increased by 1 as of about 3 weeks ago. So there's another child needing your ever-attentive support and care. Thank you.
Thank you, John. If anybody else wishes to speak to the budget, please come forward and state your name and address. Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing and come back to council. No action is needed at this point.
Correct.
Any questions, comments at this point?
Mr. Sarah does have a brief presentation of a few changes we respectively see in the budget. So, Phil, if you would do that, please.
Yeah.
Got a couple slides to go through. This was the slide that was requested in Monday night's work session. This graph shows the change in levels of tax receipts for room and meal taxes versus real estate taxes for the past 16 years from 2000 through 2016. The red line is real estate taxes, and you can see from 2000 through 2009, a rather sharp increase in property assessments, leveling for 2010, then a 3-year decline with the economy, approximately 14% in property values. Values slowly came back from the 2010 level for the next 3 years. And of course, part of the increase is attributed to a slight increase in the tax rate change from 54 cents to 57. That was in response to those declining values in those 3 years before that. So next year's real estate tax receipts are estimated to be very close to the same level as 2009 and 10. The green line is room and meal taxes. They've been fairly steady up through 2006. Then a lot of tourism revenue generated with the Jamestown 2007 celebration, then declining here with a couple years, coming back into 2010, and moving up from there. And most of that, as we know, is attributed to the meal tax increases. So that's kind of give you an idea of how the revenues jog back and forth, competing for the top revenue source for the city. I might add that combined right here, these combined were about 59% of the operating revenues compared to about 57% here. So it's, the major revenues of the city are consistently about the same percentage of the total over that same period of time, 16 years. And the next slide. This is where we are right now. Of course, the city budget's only been out less than 2 weeks. There are a couple changes that have come about that we know of since the county budget was issued last week. That's mainly the library. A little bit more will be needed for the library to be in compliance with the contract. Also, if we were to go with the county's number for the school operating contribution, that number would come down about $56,000. Also, as a placeholder, we've got an increase to be discussed into greater detail, I'm sure, $10,000 more for the Arts Commission. Again, this is a placeholder, and if we were to increase that, the county contribution would go up by agreement for their share of half. Okay, so that would entail a change in the revenues, or the change in the excess of revenues over expenditures would be about $47,000 right now. Most of that, of course, is attributed to the decrease in the school operating cost. On the capital side, this number, this is where the next year's capital projects would be for all the projects that are slated in the county plan, not including the middle school. We've had a placeholder in our budget for all of those 5 years of the CIP for the school projects, simply because we don't know exactly what they are until the county makes their recommendation in their proposed budget, which came out last week. So that would boost that up $301,000, obviously coming from reserves to pay for those additional school projects. So, and the other few funds, the other three funds the city has, there were no changes to date so far. They're not impacted by the county.
Phil, thank you very much. And these will continue to have marginal changes as we move forward as well. Are there any questions for Phil at this point? Okay. Thank you very much, Phil. Appreciate that. That concludes the budget public hearing. That brings us to our next public hearing, which is PCR 15-02, Williamsburg Chrysler Jeep Kia Special Use Permit at 3012 Richmond Road. Carolyn, welcome.
Thank you, Mayor Holman and members of council. This is a request for an addition just over 1,900 square feet to the Williamsburg Chrysler Jeep Kia dealership on Richmond Road. The applicant notes the expansion is needed for replacement parts and specialized equipment that is presently filling every nook and corner of the existing shop. This property is designated as corridor commercial in the 2013 comp plan, which notes that this category designates land on the city's heavily traveled entrance corridors for commercial and service uses primarily oriented towards the automobile. The surrounding properties to the north, south, and east are designated corridor commercial, with the land to the west designated low-density, single-family detached residential in the comp plan. And this is, it's not doing very well. The property, along with properties to the north, south, and east, are zoned corridor business district B2, with the property to the west zoned single-family dwelling district RS2. The 4.3-acre site meets all basic city zoning requirements. Existing entrances, lighting, and landscaping will not be affected by the new addition. As noted by the applicant, this small addition will allow the dealership needed space, which is appropriate since it will match the existing design and will be located towards the rear of the building. Planning Commission held a public hearing in March, and no one spoke on the request. The Commission voted 6-0 and recommends that City Council approve the special use permit request. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have. Robert Gerling, who is here representing the applicant, can answer any questions you may have of him also.
Okay. Carolyn, thank you very much. Any questions before I open the public hearing? If not, I will open the public hearing and ask anyone who wishes to address this issue to please come forward and state your name and address. Seeing none, I will close the public hearing and come back to council for discussion and action.
It's hard for me to imagine an addition to a structure that could be less inconspicuous than this, and I can see absolutely no reason not to approve it.
Okay.
If it helps them do a better job at doing a good job, then I think we should move forward.
I think.
Mr. Mayor, I'll move to approve the special use permit as recommended by the Planning Commission.
Second?
I have a motion and a second. Would you call the roll, please, Jerry?
Ms. Newsom.
Aye.
Mr. Pond.
Aye.
Mayor Holman.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Fryland.
Aye.
Mr. Foster.
Our next public hearing is the hotel, motel, and housing revisions to the zoning ordinance and comprehensive plan. There are 4 action items here. Carolyn, you're going to do a presentation on all 4.
Yes, sir.
And then we'll open the public hearing for discussion and come back. And I think at that time, Chris, we can take action on all 4 at the same time.
Yes.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor, before she
Yes.
begins, I'd like to just say for the record that I'll recuse myself from discussing any of the 4 items, as I have applications before the city dealing with this, and it's my application that brought some of these issues forward. So,
Thank you. Carolyn?
This is a package of zoning ordinance and comprehensive plan changes that was developed based on City Council's discussions about the issue of converting hotels and motels in the city's B2 areas into permanent housing. These changes further the goal of preserving land for commercial development and redevelopment in the B2 zone areas, which are designated as core to commercial land use by the comprehensive plan. They provide an opportunity for converting a limited amount of existing hotel-motel rooms to adaptive housing for the purpose of providing non-permanent, affordable, and flexible term housing for individuals and families who may not have access to traditional housing alternatives existing in the city. The first case, 15-003, amends the zoning ordinance definition of hotel-motel and visitor. The zoning ordinance now limits the length of stay for hotels and motels to not more than 90 consecutive days, with exceptions for employees, managers, and rooms and suites with complete kitchens. This is now specified as part of the hotel-motel definition. Proposed ordinance 15-06 removes the length of stay regulations from the hotel-motel definition, and it is proposed to take effect on July the 1st, 2015. This will give City Council time to amend Article 9 of the City Code, which is the licenses, permits, and business regulations, which now contains regulations for hotel guest registration by adding length of stay criteria for hotels and motels. These proposals will be presented to City Council in May. In addition, the visitor definition has a length of stay change from 90 days to 30 days, since the definition is needed for other uses other than hotels and motels. The amendments that will be proposed for Article 9 will create a standard length of stay of 30 days with more flexible exceptions to the standard 30-day length of stay that we currently have in the zoning ordinance. Exceptions being investigated include adding an exemption for persons engaged in employment activities as an employee or independent contractor with documentation on file at the hotel or motel and with the principal place of residence that is not the room or suite being occupied, and 2, temporary housing for families in crisis who are receiving temporary housing assistance in conjunction with a contract between the Williamsburg Human Services Department and the hotel motel. The current exemptions for hotel motel employees and managers and for extended stay rooms and suites with a complete kitchen facilities will be continued. PCR 1504 is an amendment to the zoning ordinance for the B2 regulation, residential uses. The B2 district now allows residential uses, which are multifamily dwellings, condominiums, and townhouses, with a special use permit, provided that not more than 67% of the total floor area is devoted to the residential use. This is the provision under which the Quarter Path Associates request was submitted PCR 14-23. To clarify this provision, proposed ordinance 15-07 revises the B2 regulations to state that residential uses would need to be in conjunction with new development or major redevelopment and would not include the reuse of existing buildings. Under this provision, existing hotel-motel buildings could not be converted to a residential use. However, the proposed PDH district allows the creation of up to 100 adaptive housing units in the city's B2 district, subject to rezoning to PDH on a case-by-case basis. PCR 15-05 amends the 2013 comp plan for residential uses in the corridor commercial land use areas. To support the proposed changes to the B2 district, several sections of the text of the 2013 comp plan need to be revised. Proposed ordinance 15-08 includes a package of changes that will clarify that residential use in corridor commercial land use areas is to be only for new development or major redevelopment in order to preserve and encourage commercial development and redevelopment on the limited amount of highly visible commercial sites that are available. PCR 1506 is amending the zoning ordinance to create the PDH district. Based on discussions with City Council, a new planned development housing zoning district has been developed as proposed ordinance 15-09. The major features of the PDH district are rezoning to the PDH district is allowed only for property currently zoned B2. The rezoning to PDH is allowed only for existing hotels and motels. Adaptive housing is defined as primarily efficiency and one-bedroom units with adequate cooking facilities created from all or part of an existing hotel or motel and used for the purpose of providing non-permanent, affordable, and flexible term housing for individuals and families who may not have access to traditional housing alternatives existing in the city. No more than 100 adaptive housing units are permitted, with no more than 50 units in an individual adaptive housing facility. Planning Commission felt that this was a reasonable number of units. A new parking requirement is created for adaptive housing unit that does not exceed the required parking for hotel motel use, and the rezoning application would require a management plan which is required to include procedures to link residents with the Human Services Department and other non-governmental organizations addressing human service needs. Planning Commission held a public hearing on March the 18th, and one person spoke on the hearing. Planning Commission recommended by a vote of 6-0 that all 4 cases be approved. That's all I have for my presentation. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to try to answer them.
Thank you for an excellent summary of a complex issue. Thank you very much. Any questions? We have discussed this at multiple meetings over the past 4 months or so. So I think. But any questions, comments?
Just, if Ms. Murphy could offer one additional point of information. This has taken a lot of conversation, and we could say it's been. Some people feel like it's been too much. Some people think it could probably use a little more conversation. But I think the underlying effort here is to maintain the commercial property that we already have in the city. So, Ms. Murphy, could you just remind us, out of the total city area, how much of that property is currently zoned commercial?
Oh, I can't remember the number right off the top of my head. This ordinance would affect the B2 properties, which is basically Capitol Landing Road, 2nd Street, Penniman Road, portion of York Street, portion of Richmond Road from Bypass Road towards out to the city line, and a small portion at 199. So that's the B2 zone property that this would affect. So,
Mr. Tuttle, I seem to recall you've given us a number of somewhere around
Right.
10%? Or?
Of course, I got the number from Ms. Murphy, she just doesn't.
Okay.
That number is about 10% of the land area of the city is zoned for either commercial use or an economic development use, and a portion of that is undeveloped, and most of that in the quarter path area. So, again, only about 10% of our land area.
And I only mention that to remind folks about how precious that commercial land is, and that's why a lot of this conversation is taking place, because we're trying to maintain that for obvious reasons. That's it.
Scott?
Paul, mention that some people think we've talked about this plenty. I'm one of those people. I can't. Previous meeting on this topic outlined the merits. I can't add anything to that.
Thanks. Judy?
Can't talk.
Yeah. Well, and I think the other thing to consider here is that this really is an important step for the community, because to this point, there's been a gap, I think, in our sort of comprehensive housing policy, and this is an important step in helping to close that gap. It's not going to solve all the problems, but it's the first time that the city has had a definite policy toward meeting a particular segment of the housing needs in this community, and I think that's why it's critically important. With that said, I will open the public hearing. I have one speaker's card, Jacob Scheinman. Jacob, welcome.
Okay. I'd like to say that the student impact supports the zoning amendments allowing hotels and motels to convert to apartments, but wishes that there were fewer limits on conversions. Opening up the city to more conversions from the B2 district into residential units would help kill two birds with one stone. It would make housing in Williamsburg more affordable and help the hospitality industry deal with its low occupancy rates. Affordable housing is an issue in the city of Williamsburg that negatively impacts low-income workers, students, and businesses. Many that work in Williamsburg are unable to afford to live there and have to add hours to their already arduous workday with a long commute. The business community recognizes the importance of providing workforce housing, and many of its prominent members have publicly spoken in favor of permitting more conversions. The affordable housing shortage also negatively impacts students by making it more difficult for many of them to afford off-campus housing. Who here could have afforded to pay $800 a month for rent when they were in college? Hotels and motels in Williamsburg are experiencing tough times, as is evidenced by room sales declining once again last year despite an overall economic recovery. It makes sense for these businesses to be allowed to convert to residential housing because it only requires modest modifications. This would open up more affordable housing opportunities and help hotel owners recoup some of their recent losses. The proposed PDH zoning district is a great way to help both struggling hotels and motels and low-income residents, but the limit to the number of conversions is unnecessary, and reducing the length of stay makes it more difficult for service industry workers to find temporary housing. Concerns about the loss of limited B2 business space are unfounded because the hospitality industry's low occupancy rates show there's a surplus of rooms. The free market, not an imposed limit, will do the best job of determining how many units should be converted. Stricter limits on the length of stay in hotels and motels partially negate the progress that approving the councilman's proposal would create. These rules would either stop people from staying so long in hotels, hurting the hospitality industry and the people looking for housing, or force them to move between hotels every 30 days, making their lives more difficult. The very fact that there are concerns that workers are trying to live out of motels confirms that there is a shortage of affordable housing. I appreciate your attention to this issue and your hard work on this complicated topic. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jerry. Anybody else wish to speak to this issue? If so, please come forward and state your name and address. If not, I'll close the public hearing and come back to council for discussion and action.
I don't have anything further to say. As Mr. Foster mentioned, I could move through it a little more quickly, but we're at a place of what we've arrived at makes the best sense for the circumstances we have.
Ms. Shelton, I understand that we can do this in one fell motion. All righty. Mr. Mayor, I move we approve PCR 15-003, 15-004, 15-005, and 15-006.
Chris, is that okay, or do we need to state the ordinance numbers?
You should probably state the ordinance numbers.
Hold on.
Those are ordinance
You got them all, yeah?
1506 through 9.
Okay. Mr. Mayor, I move we approve proposed ordinance 15-06 through 15-09.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to approve the proposed ordinances 15-06 through 15-09. Jerry, would you call the roll, please?
Ms. Newton.
Aye.
Mr. Pond.
Abstain.
Mayor Holman.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Fryland.
Aye.
Mr. Foster.
Aye.
Thank you all, and I want to thank staff for the tremendous amount of effort that went into this. I think up and down the line, people contributed and helped us think through and get to a point that I think we have a good policy for dealing with a complicated issue of housing. So and Jack, I hope you'll convey that thanks to all the staff.
Certainly will.
who
Thank you.
contributed. Okay. Our next agenda item today are reports. The first is the monthly financial statements. Jack, anything?
Just one thing to point out, on page 3, that's the page that has our sales tax fund, our capital improvement fund. You'll notice that in the current fiscal year, under sale of property, there's a negative figure of $114,800. What that is the difference in the sales price between the Lord Padgett property, what the city purchased it for, and what we ended up selling it for to Copper Fox for economic development purposes. And that's a way of booking that so that that will show up then in the asset difference in the government-wide financial statements that you'll receive in your CAFR. So don't normally see a minus number under revenue, but that's what that is.
Just as a reminder, isn't there a small parcel that remains under
Yes.
city ownership?
Yes.
So that asset is
That-
still ours to be.
that asset is
sold.
still the city's, yes,
So
it
that
is.
negative number
Could change, that's right, if the value were in that, if we sold that parcel, that's right.
Any other questions or comments? Thanks. Monthly departmental operating reports, anything in particular?
Just one thing, Mr. Clayton's coming up. I was asked a question a couple of days ago about the difference in our recycling and refuse numbers year-to-date this year versus year-to-date last year with the changes that are going on. And so I asked Mr. Clayton to help us out.
Okay.
Dan.
If you, Mayor, City Council, look on page 2 of the key indicators, key metrics. Like Jack said, we wanted to look at those, talk about those a little bit. Under the refuse and recycling, you got 3 items there. One's the tons of refuse collected, and tons of recycling collected, and then you have the recycling set-out rate. If you see on the tons, not too far off. We had 195 tons last month at this time, and this year we had 162 tons. I looked at last year's tonnage for the 12 months. It fluctuates quite a bit. Our range last year, for example, was 120 tons to 195 tons, depending on the month. Nothing really different. Same contractor, same routes, same people being collected. So, not much to say there. Did want to point out that the good news here is that we're not charged on the tonnage. It doesn't really matter what the tonnage is. We're charged on a per pickup basis. So that doesn't really affect the cost on the cost side. If you look at the recycling, it's pretty even for this month versus last month. We're a little down for the year to date, and what's been able to find out that what's happening is, actually nationally it's happening, is that the glass packaging has really been reduced, mostly because of transportation costs. You can imagine a truck full of glass versus a truck full of plastic containers of the same material. So the glass is really down, the amount of glass that's being used for packaging. So they're finding that this thing's affecting not the volume so much, but the tonnage, and that they're saying these numbers are ranging pretty high, from 10 to 20% of the tonnage on a national basis is being reduced. So I think that explains a lot of the recycling difference there. And then I wanted to just point out that the recycling set-out rate, that you can tell there, is quite a bit higher, and I think that's just the fact that we're doing every other week now, and you don't want to miss a week, because then you got to wait a month before you get your stuff picked up. So people are getting their stuff out.
Okay.
So just a little heads up on this stuff.
Thanks for following up on that. Any questions, comments?
Well, just a comment. Thank you for following up on the tonnage, and that makes perfect sense. When I looked at the set-out rate, I didn't quite look at it that way, the way that you just mentioned it, but I think you're right. But I was thinking that it's much more convenient.
It's easier, yes, sir.
For people to wheel it out there than picking it up and taking it out there. So that's my comment.
And the other thing is, if people are recycling more, the tonnage of garbage, refuse is going to go down.
The numbers on the recycling aren't quite where we want. We're not sure. that's still being looked at. We're in our first year on the recycling, and the numbers aren't quite that high, tonnage-wise, but we're still in the first year. We're not sure, different contractor and all that, so that's still kind of in the wash.
So we'll have a better sense, sort of,
After
over the
another
next
year,
couple of
yeah.
years. How it's really going.
Exactly, yes, sir.
Dan, thank you very much for that. Anything else on operating
Yes, sir.
reports? Any other
Well,
any questions?
I was going to mention on the monthly operating reports, I noticed that, so pull it up here. Interesting that room sales were up, but meal sales were down in the city, and you would think that there would be a natural correlation that if room sales were up, meal sales would be up, but I think you can't really explain that. It's not a whole lot of room nights, but it could have been a conference or a small group in town. But I think because of the bad weather that we had in February, it kept a lot of the locals from going out and dining. And to me, I think this kind of goes to the conversation that we've had of, what percentage of meals is actually consumed by tourists or visitors. And I think this is just a little, evidential that kind of says to me that so much of meals, maybe in upwards of half of what we see in meals is actually local dining versus visitor dining. So I think it's probably worth some further thought and conversation as we've promised to do in the past.
Just help me, you probably keep track of this closely than I do. Was Easter later last year?
Yes. I think it was a week later.
Okay. Any other questions, comments? If not, the city manager report, and this is the York Street improvement for the award of bids.
City Engineer Aaron Small will give this report.
And again, Mr. Mayor, I'm going to recuse myself from this conversation. I have a corner property on Quarter Path in York Street, and it's about 700 linear feet of what's being proposed to be enhanced. And I think it's just best that I recuse myself from the conversation.
Thank you, Bill. Aaron, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. We're here to discuss the York Street Improvements Project. If you recall, this project begins at the Page, York, Lafayette intersection here at the east, shown on the map. Extends down York Street all the way to Quarter Path Road and then up Quarter Path Road for about 300 feet to the entrance of the Quarter Path Recreation Center. This project includes replacing the existing streetlights along York Street that are located within the sidewalk area. And so what we'll be doing is pulling out those streetlights and putting new ones in behind the sidewalk. We will also be replacing some of the curb, especially in this area, closer to the York Page Lafayette intersection end. The curb is getting kind of old and is in disrepair right now. We will also be providing sidewalk replacement, some repairs along some of the sidewalk on the north side of the street, along the hotels, as well as some repairs where we're pulling out the street lights and replacing those. On the south side, we will be providing a wide, family-friendly path. We have some fairly narrow sidewalks from Quarter Path Rec Center all the way up to about Pocahontas Street. We will be then widening that sidewalk out to about 7 feet wide and extending it all the way up to the entrance to Bassett Hall to provide a very wide corridor. That will also be exposed aggregate concrete so that it kind of delineates this wide path, as this is the main path from the bike paths and travel ways up around the Quarter Path Rec Center and the Quarter Path development all the way into the historic district. This is the existing gravel path that's there now along the CW pasture that's become kind of a problem for some of our visitors. And this will make it handicap accessible for the entire lane. In addition to that, we'll also be enhancing the landscaping along that area to make it more unified, working with a lot of the business owners along that area to make that work, as well as Then the final thing we'll be doing is providing paving. This was approved at our last council meeting, as you recall, for the resurfacing of the entire section of York Street in this area. This project is kind of an extension. If you recall, a few years ago, the city applied, along with James City County and York, for a major streetscape that started at this intersection and went all the way out to Busch Gardens area. That grant was not approved by VDOT, but VDOT, or the city, took the bull by the horns and decided to go forth with revenue sharing on this project, and we were awarded 50% revenue sharing grant for this. And so this is now the result of that. In March 25th, we received bids on the project for 4 contractors. As you can see, the bids are up here on the screen. Messer Contracting, LLC of Glen Allen, Virginia, was the low bidder on the project. We're very familiar with Messer Contracting. They were the ones who have been doing the last 2 sidewalk revenue sharing projects that we've had over the past few years. So we're very comfortable working with them. With that, that concludes my presentation.
Aaron, thank you very much. Any questions for Aaron or the city manager?
I have 2 questions. Mr. Small, with the improvement of the sidewalk to 7 feet wide on the side where there's currently basically a dirt path.
Yes.
Or a worn path through the grass, will the bike lane continue to be there?
The bike lane along York Street will be restriped after we do the paving, and so we'll still have a parallel bike lane as well as our wide.
One thing I would ask, just not for this project, but just for the longer term, if we have another project like this, I can't imagine where exactly it would be, but if it does come about, exposed aggregate is an attractive surface and it's fine in a car. It's really tough if you're pushing a stroller, because it creates constant vibration on the wheels and the occupants of the stroller. Yeah, it's also tough. It's just tougher on pedestrians as well, because it's a rock hard surface. It's even in some ways harder than regular concrete, because but there are other materials out there that are aesthetically pleasing, that don't have the blacktop appeal, which I can appreciate why we don't want another strip of asphalt along that pasture. But if we could just do some research if there are any viable alternatives, if a project like this comes up, I think we should look into that.
I'd just add, it's a conversation that was endless around here. The alternatives of looking at an asphalt trail, and rejected mainly because of the aesthetics along the pasture, looking at just regular concrete, looking at even going so far as a brick surface, and not only cost issues there, but just the width of it. And the exposed aggregate for the sidewalk it's not like the Colonial Parkway. It's much more finer aggregate, so it's not as bumpy as you would find on something like the Colonial Parkway. So we've sort of been through all the different materials and pros and cons, and probably not a perfect material, but I felt this was the best of all the options. So do you want to add anything to that, Aaron?
Well, and this is something that we can take into consideration when we're talking with the contractor and how they work with their finishing of the exposed aggregate. Just because of the way the process is done, it's actually a finished concrete. We will use smaller brown rock aggregate, and then it's just a matter of making sure they don't over wash it off when they wash the surface concrete off.
And I'd just add, too, we really felt along that pasture, it needed to have a pasture-like setting. It would be a softer appearing surface, and I think that's what kind of tipped to using the exposed aggregate surface.
Any other questions?
Talk a little bit about the street lights.
Yes, sir.
I know aren't there some lights on the hotel, across York Street from the pasture that almost function as street lights, but are part of that?
We've actually worked with the hotel in that area, and they have agreed to remove those streetlights, and we will be replacing them with more modern shoebox type lights that more fit the rest of the lights in their parking lot.
Gotcha. Very good.
Just add to that, one of them is kind of a Gothic kind of thing, and the other one's colonial, and it's disjointed. And so they're really put in there as parking lot lights as opposed to street lights. But our lights now will have, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but we're going to have to light their parking lot as well as the street. So they'll get the light they need, but we'll have a much cleaner look without the gargoyles.
Good deal. Thanks.
Correct.
Anything else?
Mr. Mayor, I'll move that council authorize the city manager to award the bid and execute a contract with Mr. Contracting LLC for $757,589.40 under the VDOT Revenue Sharing Program for the York Street Corridor Project.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Would you call the roll, please, Jerry?
Ms. Newton.
Aye.
Mr. Pond.
Abstain.
Mayor Holman.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Fryland.
Aye.
Mr. Foster.
Aye.
Thank you. Thank you, Aaron. Thank you, Jack. And again, thank all the staff that was involved in this, because it's, again, this goes back, as Aaron said, a number of years to the beautification project for all of 60 East, and we've been able to do part of it anyway, so thank you. City Attorney reports, I believe we have
Nothing today.
Thank you. That brings us to our next agenda item, which is unfinished business, the Williamsburg noise ordinance request for modification. Jack?
Yes, by way of introduction, last month, the City Council met on this issue. We received a request a couple of months ago from the Student Impact Group to look at changes in the noise ordinance. There's been quite a bit of research done on this, both by the city staff, the police department primarily, as well as the city attorney, and that information was presented last month. And since that time, the city attorney has also written a fairly detailed memo on what has emerged as the dominant issue at stake, and that is whether violations of the noise ordinance should result in misdemeanor penalties or civil penalties. And so on that issue, if you have questions, I would ask the city attorney if she would address that. So the long and short of it is that with the cautions with regard to moving to civil penalties in mind that the city attorney explained in her memorandum, as well as recognition that the noise regulations and the enforcement system the city has in place now there's good reason to call it balanced and effective. And so at this point, the staff is not recommending changes to the ordinance, but realize that this is an issue that can always be brought back and looked at in the future should information on the ground tell us something new or something changes in the legal world with regard to the nature of the penalties, be they civil or criminal. So actually, our recommendation is not for any action by you today.
Any questions for the city manager?
Can I,
Yeah.
would this, just for the benefit of anybody who may not have had the opportunity to read the memo, could the city attorney just give a brief description of the difficulty in police enforcement of a civil penalty?
In Virginia, police are not authorized to enforce civil matters. They operate in the world of criminal matters. There are a few specific exceptions to that, but this is not one of those exceptions. And so there is a very serious legal question about whether or not the police department even has the authority to enforce this were city council to choose to go to a civil penalty. Of course, council can choose to do that and have some other city staff member enforce it, but there are practical and safety reasons why the staff is not recommending that.
This could change if the General Assembly changed the list of actions that police departments could take.
There are a
But
variety of
short of that.
there are a variety of statutes that could be amended by the General Assembly to clearly give the police department authority to enforce civil penalties in this context.
Thank you.
Yes, sorry, could you indulge me for one more question? In a variety of the communication we've received, one point that's made repeatedly is that Williamsburg has the most severe, and I can't remember the exact wording, the strictest or penalties for noise violations of any community in the state of Virginia or college community. Could you please elaborate what the research has shown on that point?
Most college jurisdictions in the state have continued with misdemeanor penalties. They range from Class 1 to Class 4, which is the gradation of misdemeanors. I was trying to reach my memo so I can refresh my recollection. Fairfax, for example, is a Class 1. Newport News is a Class 2. Norfolk is a Class 2. Virginia Beach is a Class 3. Hampton doesn't specify a class, but their fine is larger than the city of Williamsburg's fine. Blacksburg is a Class 2. I would say we're pretty typical.
Thank you.
So, and is it, there's one town that has criminal, Radford?
Radford makes it a criminal offense. They don't specify a class, and unlike most jurisdictions where the first and second offense only really is a fine involved, they actually have imprisonment for up to 10 days as a potential penalty for a first offense.
Which is a bit stricter. Any other questions? This is not a public hearing, and typically we would not accept public comment here. However, I do have several speakers cards because this comes before our open forum, and because these speakers cards are addressing this. With council's permission, I will ask those people if they would wish to speak. Typically during our open forum, we limit the remarks to 3 minutes, and I think we will do that here since these are essentially public forum, open forum comments that we are moving forward to this point because they are relevant to this discussion. So with council's permission, I'll do that. The first speaker's card I have is Benmi Jong.
Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor.
Good afternoon.
I am humbled by my experiences in these past 2 months. Just yesterday, I had a nice talk with some of my neighbors near the corner of our street, and I'd like to share some of the observations after these past few months. There are moments when we hear horror stories from both sides. The raucous party-goer neighbor or spine-strict neighbor who eyes suspiciously at you every time. But something that I've learned these past few months in talking with residents, administrators, and council members is that despite our differences, our stark differences sometimes, faith is something that holds the city together. There are moments like yesterday when neighbors from both generations, older and younger, can come together and have a friendly, honest chat. There will always be some tension that will coexist between our longtime residents and our often forgetful, energetic, transient neighbors who often exert a certain youthful exuberance. Sometimes we are confronted with a delicate balance in which time can test our patience just as much as time can heal our wounds. Perhaps the scope of a law or a policy does not go far enough. Certain policies bring out certain perceptions. Changing a law simply as a gesture of goodwill will not solve anything. Rather, there needs to be a shared trust that the good faith will prevail for the sake of the city's future, for we rely on the younger generation of folks to invest in the city. It's crucial that students are often the main drivers of the city's economy. On behalf of my team members, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to thank you and thank the members of the City Council, residents whom we had a chance to meet, the city staff members for giving us the time and day to sit down with us. I'd like to also personally thank Chief Slogey and the rest of the police department for all they do to enforce the laws, and to protect both students and locals in our community. I'd like to know, Mr. Mayor, that they are very patient and accommodating as we aired out our concerns regarding the noise ordinance. It's not an easy job for them, I realize, as they are often a bridge to numerous divisive town-gown relations issues. I'd like to also thank them for taking their time to reach out to students, especially in the beginning of the year, and I can promise that my organization will do the same to build awareness among our peers on campus to respect our neighboring locals. As we conclude this often feisty issue that we've introduced and brought along in these past few months, I'd like to end it with one thing, and hopefully that you guys can ponder and reflect when you're pondering future discussions about policies that may affect both neighbors and students, is that there cannot be a Williamsburg without its students, just as there cannot be a Williamsburg without its longtime residents. Thank you.
Thank you, Benny. Next speaker's card I have is Joshua Fleetman. Josh? Welcome.
Mr. Mayor, members of City Council, my name is Josh Fleetman. I'm the Deputy Political Director for Student Impact, and I spoke to you on the issue of the noise ordinance at the February meeting. I'd like to start off by thanking City Council, City Manager Tuttle, Police Chief Sloggy, Deputy Planning Director Carolyn Murphy, City Attorney Shelton, city staff, and members of the Neighborhood Relations Committee and Neighborhood Council of Williamsburg for taking all the time that they have to think about and talk about this issue, gathering information and discussing it at last month's and this month's City Council meetings. I understand schedules are very busy, and I speak on behalf of the entire Student Impact and our student supporters in saying that we do sincerely appreciate your consideration of our requests. I very much value the citywide dialogue about the noise ordinance that has been sparked over the past few months. However, one component that has been missing from this dialogue, somewhat obscure by looking solely at the data, are the personal stories of those who have been impacted by the law. Although we agree with Mr. Tuttle's statements that the data suggests the noise ordinance that in general works well in terms of the number of complaints compared to the number of summons, I'd like to point out the downsides of the current process once someone is charged with offending the noise ordinance. The personal story of my close friend and housemate Gus illuminates many of the problems and unnecessary burdens associated with penalizing first-time offenders of the noise ordinance with the misdemeanor charge. On September 28, 2014, Gus and two other friends of his were sitting on the back porch of our house after 11 p.m., having a conversation at a normal volume with music of moderate volume playing inside the empty house. Two police officers happened to be walking by through the neighborhood, and without a complaint being lodged, issued Gus a $300 ticket and with a summons to appear in court concerning his Class 2 misdemeanor charge. Gus went to his court date a few months later, which I joined him at for support. Gus had to spend 3 hours in court that morning as part of a group session. This is time that he could have spent putting towards his studies as a Dean's List double major in neuroscience and Hispanic studies. I'm sure you all know the high importance that William & Mary students place in academics, so this time in court is not unimportant. Other students may be forced to miss class to attend their court summons. Although Gus was fortunate and he had his charge dismissed, which the data shows happened about 50% of the time, he had to pay an $85 court fee. All of this burden simply for having a conversation with friends on his back porch. I tell this story because in light of the city attorney's report on the legal and practical difficulties with decriminalizing the first offense, I urge the city to take the time and energy to completely exhaust all legal avenues towards decriminalization. With the Student Assembly in agreement, decriminalizing the first offense is a policy change that would satisfy student residents without dismantling any of the existing protections against unreasonable noise disturbances. I see Williamsburg as having the capacity to be a leader among Virginia localities in adopting a progressive, fair noise ordinance where the punishment matches the crime, that protects first-time offenders from at worst having their records marred with misdemeanor charges, and at best having to undergo the onerous process that Gus experienced. As Ms. Shelton wrote in her wonderful memo, quote, "It is reasonable to assume that the General Assembly plainly intended to permit localities to utilize civil process in lieu of criminal process in enforcing noise ordinances," end quote.
Thank you. Could you wrap up, please?
Sure.
Thank you.
If after fully exhausting all legal avenues and opinions, Ms. Shelton's recommendations today are fully confirmed, and decriminalizing a noise ordinance is not right for Williamsburg, the Student Impact would then advocate firmly for reducing the misdemeanor classes for noise violations. We'd argue that rather than a Class 2 misdemeanor for the first and second offenses, a Class 4 misdemeanor with a maximum fine of $250 would be more appropriate. Thank you for your time, and have a good day.
Josh, thank you very much. Final speaker's card I have is Scott Carabello. Scott, welcome.
Good afternoon, Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of council. Thank you for hearing me today. I will try and keep it brief. Where the city's noise ordinance is concerned, the last few months have been interesting, to say the very least. I've had a series of meetings with you all and with the Neighborhood Relations Committee, and so we thank you for the due time and consideration that you've put into this issue. Having read over the memos from both City Manager Jack Tuttle and City Attorney Christina Shelton, it seems that the discussion has, for now, been put to rest, should be put to rest. Student Assembly respects the city's findings and conclusions, regardless of however much we had hoped that they would be different. Legal questions aside, we maintain that decriminalization of the first noise violation is a moderate, agreeable step forward for our community. It would further the community's cohesiveness and help develop bonds of trust between students and residents living side by side. As I mentioned in the letter that you attached to the agenda, it's our belief that such reform would make lawful behavior expected out of trust rather than compelled by the threat of a day in court. So, due to legal complications, while this debate may not have reached the end result that many of us desired, we hope that it will not disappear entirely. As the city manager's memo stated, should experience on the ground in 2015 and next year or new legal information suggest that such a change is needed and workable, then the matter can be reopened. We hope that council will keep these words in mind should we find ourselves facing such circumstances. One final note, I was reflecting back, it's been 2 years since April 2013 when we were all here and students came out and advocated for the comprehensive plan. At that time, that seemed like it itself was a new height for student engagement in the community. I think that has yet again been surpassed by this debate. After all, student engagement is how this conversation surfaced. So that, I've said it a million times, but it's a testament to the continually improving relationship between students and the city, and I hope that you all continue to help further build this relationship and continue to make this community the best that it can be. Thank you.
Scott, thank you. And I do want to take a minute to recognize your contributions. I know you're going to be graduating about the time we meet next, but over the time you've been here, you've been the student representative to the Neighborhood Council of Williamsburg, and you've been a member of the Neighborhood Relations Committee, and we thank you for that service. I'll return to council for
Thoughts?
Discussion?
I think Mr. Zhang made a comment that is important to think about, and that's the delicate balance of the relations between all the residents within the community. And I think for the most part, the past few years, we've achieved a really good degree of balance between trying to allow people to enjoy their surroundings, however they choose to do that. Some, as Mr. Zhang said, by expressing their exuberance, and others perhaps by seeking rest in later hours. And I think there's been good give and take. And I would hate to see anything unduly disrupt what is a much more positive situation than I would say we had 6 years ago or even before that. And I think, the degree of student engagement in the community has been extremely positive from a number of different aspects. And I'll credit Mr. Foster with a lot of that, with him being able to come on council, and although you're no longer a student, providing that perspective. And I think we learned from each other, and I think as the students became more involved and participated more, we were all able to see that we're not really all that far apart on a lot of these issues, and some of the finer points that are harder to work out. And the one finer point, and it's a big point, that still sticks with me, is the issue about the criminal offense, or the first offense being a criminal offense. Clearly, I don't think at this point we can change that because we don't have any means of enforcing it if we do. But that doesn't mean it's not still worth exploring. And so, Mr. Mayor, I'd ask you potentially to, or if our colleagues agree, to work with the Student Assembly over the summer and see if there are other steps that can be taken, and how do we do this without disrupting that delicate balance that we've achieved and want to maintain.
And I think there are ways to do that, and I encourage the student impact and the Student Assembly to engage with us as we move through the summer and explore options.
And of course, we'd also want to involve the other residents in those communities because they have just as vested an interest in this.
Exactly.
That's all I have to say.
Scott?
Paul, I appreciate your comments on multiple levels. The most beneficial aspect of this conversation has been we've got to hear a lot of instances where things are working well. And I applaud the student involvement, student attention. I think we are better together. And it's really nice to see that energy is still there in a much more productive form than it was even in 2010. So that's very good. And as for these policy proposals, I was pretty excited about the potential to decriminalize the first offense, because I think it makes a lot of sense. But we'll just have to wait on the state to act. So.
And I don't know that I could add much to that, but, I think as a result of this, the Student Impact Group bringing this forward, it allowed for dialogue. And, some of it was with tension. But through that, I think we get that better understanding of each other, get the opportunity to hear, perspectives from different sects of a residency, and I think from that conversation, we're better off. And so this has been a good exercise. Some people were very upset about it, but I think at the end, we're heading in the right direction. I think the students that spoke today, clearly they demonstrated that they clearly understand the importance of this town and gown relationship, and they want to be a part of its success and not be a dividing factor.
On a whole nother level, this whole thing is another example of what the Dillon Rule does to us, which means something we would all like perhaps to do, or the majority of us would like to do, and we can't because of the state rules. And it's just one more, the way they behave in Richmond, which drives us all nuts sometimes.
Well, I think, this has been an important process, and as I reflect, I've been on council 15 years, and over that time, a lot of people, both on campus and off campus, have put a lot of effort into working on on town gown relations and improving town gown relations, and I think that effort has paid off. And part of that effort is a continued dialogue, and my colleagues here have spoken about the importance of that. And I think we do have to continue those dialogues because we are a diverse community, and the only way we're going to understand each other is to engage in that kind of dialogue. So I look forward as we move forward as a community to continued discussions and ideas coming forward and debates occurring, and hopefully we can reach consensus that is best for everyone in the community. So thank you all for this. And with that, we'll take no action at this time, but we will continue to monitor what goes on. We'll continue discussions with Student Impact, the Student Assembly, with the Neighborhood Council, the Neighborhood Relations Committee, and individuals and representatives of neighborhoods to see what directions we can go. Thank you all very much. This has been a good process.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
before we move to new business, I think we have one more item of unfinished business.
Okay.
Flower pots.
Okay, I was going to do that under new business, but we can do it.
Whichever.
Why don't you just say we're in new business?
We're in new business. Why don't we do the Board of Equalization appointments, and then we can talk about flower pots.
Mr. Mayor, I move that City Council adopt Resolution 15-03, recommending to the Williamsburg-James City County Circuit Court the reappointment of Jack Marston and Sharon Baker to the Board of Equalization for 3-year terms to expire June 30, 2018, and the appointment of Charles Glazer for a 3-year term to expire June 30, 2018, and to fill the unexpired term of Beverly Bertana Austin with Robert Jacoby for a 2-year term to expire June 30, 2017.
Second.
I have a motion, and a second. Would you call the roll, please? Chair?
Ms. Newton.
Aye.
Mr. Pond.
Aye.
Mayor Moore.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Fryland.
Aye.
Mr. Foster.
Aye.
Now we can talk about flower pots. Doug, I think you
Well,
had some.
thank you, Councilwoman Nixon. And Mr. Mayor, the other day I was driving up Prince George Street and taking everything in consideration, some flower pots that are in place. But what really came to mind was the investment that private sector has done on Prince George Street with the new Griffin Arms, and then I don't know if the Saris Manis family had named their building, but with the major renovations, redevelopment there, along with what the city has done with sidewalk enhancements all the way down to the Triangle building, that we ought to continue the flower pot program down Prince George Street and kind of add to what we have already begun there. It's my understanding we own the flower pots, and so I'd like to see us put them in place and incorporate that into our landscaping department.
I heard from other council members, and I believe that there's some agreement to this. I think it's important to think about this in terms of a sort of a longer-term vision for downtown and the need for us and the economic development authorities as well as the merchants in that area to really come together and see if we can't determine a broader vision for that area, and that may entail bringing a consultant in to help us think about what is appropriate for creating sort of a sense of place in not only in Merchant Square, where I think that exists, but also in the areas around Merchant Square. So I think we could do this for this coming year, but I would say that we do it for 1 year and then pending the results of that broader study, see whether this could be part of that or not, if that's acceptable.
May I just add something to that? With the discussions in the EDA, we have the Economic Development Strategic Plan divided up by regions or zones in the city, and the downtown area is clearly delineated as one of the important areas for studies is Midtown and the Northeast Triangle and others. And what I think the EDA is really looking to come out of a study is a unifying theme, a visual and aesthetic cues that when a visitor enters a particular area of the city, they feel like they're in a well-defined, in this case commercial, but in other cases it could be residential, whatever, but in the downtown area, commercial area that has a common aesthetic. But we don't yet know what's the best way to accomplish that. Probably the single unifying theme right now are brick sidewalks. And we've done a very good job of connecting those areas with those sidewalks. But what's the next best step? And that's what we want to bring in somebody with outside perspective who's seen what's worked in other communities, who's seen what's been successful, and then determine which of those makes sense for our community and our unique appeal that we offer. And I don't think anybody's expecting necessarily the flower pots that we have will be the answer, but we don't want to rule those out. At the same time, we don't want to just put in a bunch of flower pots or put in a bunch of banners or do a lot of other things that might in some ways be disruptive or not achieve the effect that we're looking for. So I agree with the 1-year term for the purpose of providing a bridge until the study can be undertaken. We can get the results, evaluate those, determine what's the best plan going forward, and how do we get the funding for that? Because you can do a lot of great things, but it's a lot easier to do them if you have the money to do it. So I think that's the perspective I'll share.
I can't say anything additional other than the fact that that sense of place, that aesthetic that is very much on purpose will define that area. I think that money on a study would be well spent.
Yeah, and I think that's the unknown right now is what for that area and for this community, what are the best things to do?
Yeah.
Okay. So with that, Jack, I think we have some consensus to move forward. So if you would move forward with that.
Okay.
Do you have enough information?
Well, perhaps if we could talk,
Yeah.
and you could clarify. There are a few questions I have, but I can have a conversation with you.
Okay.
I'm sure clear those up.
Okay, thanks.
One other thing under new business.
Yes, sir.
And maybe I should have brought it up during the budget discussion. As you all know, in the capital improvement plan, there's $21,000 set aside for planning an addition to Quarter Path Rec Center. And I support that. I just want to make sure that when we do that planning, that we have of mind some of the discussion that's happened with the feasibility study of a field house, and make sure that when we do this planning, that we don't miss an opportunity to look at the feasibility of the field house in this place, or how this, whatever expansion happens there, kind of works to support the needs identified by the chamber earlier this month, or last month, rather, in terms of creating a venue that could satisfy, help sports tourism. And so, just like this body is asked to participate in the next phase of the study for the Blayton Building, I think this body ought to be engaged in that phase of what happens at Quarter Path in terms of planning.
And I think we will continue those discussions, and that, as that sort of the field house discussion moves forward, we will have to condition our sort of planning for Quarter Path basically on the progress of that discussion.
May I?
Yes.
Would you indulge me?
Sure.
I just want to think this, thanks, you do all the time. This is a small thing, but we have this new system to remind speakers of the time allotment, and I think this was the first time it's been used. It's only going to be used during open forum and not during public hearings. Since this is new and it's going to take some time for people to get used to it, and I like the idea of creating, we create an expectation when we say, please limit your comments to a certain number of minutes, and some people, the vast majority of people are very good at doing that, and every once in a while we have some that go many times beyond that. As a sort of a starting point, could we consider 5 minutes instead of 3? I was thinking, hearing Mr. Fleetman's comments, they didn't seem to drag on particularly long, and those extra 2 minutes can sometimes give somebody the chance to really tighten up and close the argument.
In discussing this this new device, I had one sense, but seeing it applied really gave me a different sense of it, and I felt uncomfortable for the speaker, who I thought was doing a good job of communicating and wasn't being offensive, and you can see that it was wrapping it up. It was almost disconcerting for me, and it's partly because it's new, but so I appreciate it if we could do 5 minutes.
And also, if you'll remember, from time to time, we'll get a question about, do you guys limit to how long you can talk? And the answer to this point has been no during any forum. I think it's important that we kind of ensure that since it,
well, we've
been able to speak a piece of, I think 5 minutes is
Yes,
acceptable.
we've had the policy, we just haven't always applied it, have rarely applied it. So in part, this is an experiment, and I think the question may be, do we go a little bit longer at 3 minutes and see how that works as people become used to it? Do we go to 5 right now? Chris, I think this is a city council policy.
It's in your policies and procedures manual that speakers, the 3-minute rule is in your policies and procedures.
So if we were to modify that, what would be the process for modifying that?
You can modify your policies and procedures. You can temporarily modify your policies and procedures. They are your policies and procedures.
That's what I know. So we can do. Okay. Well, let's give it some thought before next month's meeting, and we can.
Well, it won't be the end of the world if we do 3 minutes another month or two, but I just wanted to
Yeah,
raise
no,
that.
I think, I've been on several regional bodies where they have, at the end of the time, there's a beeper that goes off, and I find that a little bit more intrusive. But so it's not uncommon for this type of device to be used, and our question is sort of how do we want to use it? I'm going to try at the end not to just cut somebody off, but say give them some time and then try to do it. But I think maybe moving to 5 minutes would be advisable.
And I also think it's important that we make it very clear that this is specifically for open forum,
Yes, exactly.
not during public
exactly.
hearings, because other localities, even someone who has an application before them, you have a time limit.
Yeah.
So we do not want to create that.
Not for public hearings.
Okay. I don't have anything else.
Okay. With that, we are at open forum, a time when anyone who wishes to address council on any issue may do so. If you'd like to address council, we've already been through all the speakers' cards, so if you would like to address council, please come forward, state your name and address. Seeing none, do we have anything for closed session today? I believe not. No, sorry. Okay.
Mr. Mayor, I move to adjourn.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Call the roll, please, Jerry.
Aye.
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 Meeting adjourned. Thank you.